Hi guys, so my good friend Jeff made a video about Brexit and the negotiations, so let's hear what he had to say. I'll pop in with some comments along the way.
On Thursday, the EU Parliament voted through a recommendation that doubles down on their Brexit negotiation demands and must surely now guarantee a no-deal Brexit outcome at the end of the year.
So I don't agree 100% here. I don't think it guarantees, but yes, it probably is highly likely that there won't be an extension to the transition period, or there won't actually be a deal at the end. But let's see how things progress.
Now, although there are still 10 days to go until the technical deadline of the 30th of June for agreeing a Brexit talks extension, the Boris Johnson government has made it clear that there will be no extension. That gives us just 6 months to wait to be, at last, fully free of the EU. But if a deal is to be agreed, then it needs to be done fast to give the business community as long as possible to get ready for the end of the Brexit implementation period.
Okay, that's interesting because last year Boris Johnson spent £100 million on a Get Ready for Brexit campaign. Now, can they reuse some of that material for businesses who have to get ready for the end of the transition period if there's no deal? It's looking likely that there's no deal, so Boris Johnson hasn't talked about a propaganda campaign. Is he waiting, for another while before he starts a propaganda campaign like he did last year that turned out to be a shambles because the UK didn't actually leave on the 31st of October, even though £100 million was spent on a campaign allegedly to prepare businesses. But now there's no preparation taking place. It is interesting that the EU have been preparing for a no-deal Brexit for years, but Boris Johnson doesn't seem to be preparing for one. Now, I don't know if that's incompetence or he's playing some trick.
But Brussels wants the UK still to be bound by EU rules, and the UK rightly wants to be completely free of them.
Yes, because that's called the transition period. That's called the withdrawal agreement. Boris Johnson signed up to the withdrawal agreement. It passed Parliament. It was signed, done and dusted. You're complaining that the EU want the UK to follow rules that Boris Johnson has signed up to? I don't understand.
And it thankfully looks like there will be no compromises by the UK. And the EU, despite some recent indications to the contrary, now seem to have reverted back to their control freakery type. The EU Parliament adopted a text on Thursday that basically tells the Commission and the EU Council that MEPs want Michel Barnier, the EU chief Brexit negotiator, to stick to the demands that the UK stays controlled by Brussels and that EU trawlers must be able to keep emptying our waters of fish.
Once again, I don't understand this obsession with fish or the fishing industry, which represents a tiny minority in UK industry. So someone in the comment section, thanks for posting that. Apologies, I don't remember who posted it. Said that the fishing industry is as big as the lawnmower industry, but you don't hear Boris Johnson preaching about lawnmowers.
This report was adopted by 572 votes in favour, 34 against and 91 abstentions. The EU Parliament press release talked about UK cherry-picking and its unwavering support for Michel Barnier. And it also said that Parliament's consent to any future trade agreement with the UK is conditional on the British government agreeing to a level playing field, common rules and standards in the area of, among others, environmental protection, labour standards and state aid, and on the conclusion of a satisfactory agreement on fisheries.
And this is their requirement. They said if you want to have a trade deal, this is what you must agree to. Now, of course, this is a negotiating position. They may be flexible on some of these, and they may be inflexible on others. But this is their position. Why do you have a problem with them having a position? I assume you don't have a problem with Boris Johnson or his government having a position. Should the EU just have no position on anything and just say you can do whatever you want? and we'll give you a trade deal. A trade deal needs to have rules and conditions. Otherwise, it's not an agreement. It's not something that could be ever considered legally binding. I don't understand this. You don't like the EU having conditions, but surely they should have conditions to protect their own bodies and their institutions.
This is a necessity due to the UK's geographical proximity, level of interconnectedness, and already high level of existing alignment and interdependence with EU rules. And here's a couple of paragraphs from the lengthy recommendation itself. Underlines that the EU chief negotiator has the Parliament's full and unwavering support for...
So this is very telling, because the Parliament is saying that the EU chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, has its full and unwavering support. Now this is telling because Brexiteers and Boris Johnson and members of the Conservative Party have been hinting at trying to undermine the chief negotiator's position, attempting to, also using the media as a tool to convince the public that Michel Barnier is, uncertain, or he's confused, or he looks tired, or he has some problems, or he's not up to the job. And they believe that if they can undermine the chief negotiator, that the EU will bend in some way. Now, I don't know if they actually believe this, or if it's just fodder for the idiots who follow them. But if they actually believe that, then they're barking up the wrong tree. Do they not understand that the chief negotiator is given a mandate? Now, he can't go beyond the scope of his abilities. He has strict rules to follow, but the end, the final call is the EU itself, not the chief negotiator.
Insisting that level playing field guarantees are a crucial element of any agreement with the UK, as this is not dogmatism or ideology from the EU side, but a prerequisite to establishing an ambitious and balanced partnership with the UK and preserving the competitiveness of the internal market and EU companies, as well as maintaining and developing in the future high levels of social, environmental and consumer protection.
And these are basically pillars of the European Union: maintaining and developing high levels of future environmental, social and consumer protections, in maintaining the competitiveness of the internal market and EU companies. That's what it's doing. It's saying we want to protect ourselves, basically. You have a problem with them asking Boris Johnson if they want to have a trade deal, that the EU can't make a demand that we should be able to protect ourselves?
Respects fully in this regard the sovereignty of the UK, which the EU has no intention of undermining in the current negotiations. Recalls, however, that the UK will never be equal to other third countries due to its status as a former EU member state, current complete regulatory alignment and the significant volume of trade between both parties, as well as its geographical proximity to the EU, which all explain the necessity for strong and robust level playing field provisions in the agreement.
And once again, the idea that the UK will not be treated like Japan or like China or like Canada or like Australia because of its geographical location and the trade that takes place at the moment between the EU and the UK. See, the problem is that the Brexiteers, before talking about no deal, they've been talking about having a Canada-style trade deal, a Japanese-style trade deal, an Australian-type style trade deal, even though one doesn't exist yet. They've been talking about, yes, we want to have these types of trade deals. But the EU has said, but you're not Canada, you're not China, you're not Japan, you're not Australia. You're not like any of these countries for these specific reasons. The location, the type of trade, the flow of trade as well. You're pretty much connected to us. So we can't treat you like Canada. And it's ridiculous to even entertain that possibility.
And as ever, the Spanish government continues to greedily eye the Rock of Gibraltar, reiterates its support for the negotiating directives which provide that Gibraltar will not be included in the territorial scope of the agreements to be concluded between the EU and the UK, and that any separate agreement will require the prior agreement of the Kingdom of Spain.
This has to be the best ever. You voted for this. You Brexiteers voted to have this scenario come to fruition. Remainers were talking about there could be an issue of Gibraltar before the referendum. People who wanted to stay in the European Union were talking about this. Look, maybe Gibraltar will become an issue in the future. And Brexiteers were saying, no, it will not be an issue. And also, there was nothing on the ballot. When you went in to vote for Brexit, there was nothing written about Gibraltar. Not one iota. And now you're saying, oh, wait a minute, Gibraltar is going to be on the table. We didn't vote for this. You did vote for this. Because you decided, we don't care. You would prefer to have Brexit than to have Gibraltar. In the same way, you'd prefer to have Brexit than you'd prefer to have Northern Ireland. All of these problems were presented. A lot of them were presented in a good way. Some of them were not presented in a very good way. But they were presented, and they were swatted away by Brexiteers as non-issues. And now they're issues. Northern Ireland, Gibraltar. But you voted for this. You can't go back and say, well, I didn't vote for this. Yes, you did. There was an option to maintain the status quo, to maintain Gibraltar, not to give it away. But you decided, no, I don't care about that. I don't care about Gibraltar enough to vote to remain. I don't care about Gibraltar. Let's give it away, basically. I'd prefer to have Brexit. In the same way, you preferred... Northern Ireland was always talked about as an issue. You know, what's going to happen in Northern Ireland? And it will not be an issue. It will not be an issue. And now what has happened? The Unionists in Northern Ireland have been thrown under a bus by Boris Johnson.
And they also said that they remain open to a Brexit talks extension. And on fisheries, they said, reiterates that no comprehensive agreement can be concluded between the EU and the UK if it does not include a complete, balanced and long-term agreement on fisheries and fisheries-related matters, upholding the continuation under optimal conditions of access to waters, resources and markets of the parties concerned, as well as existing fishing activities. But as the UK is taking back full independent control of its fishing grounds, as it should do, with annual quotas dished out by us, then this demand by the EU is a real deal breaker, is it not?
This is an interesting one, because it seems to me that the EU would be happy to give Boris Johnson all the fishing rights he wants. And, you know, what does the UK gain from this? You know, as I said before, the fishing industry in the UK is the equivalent of the lawnmower industry. So the EU can say, okay, we will give you your fishing industry. We're not going to touch that. Perhaps we can have some cooperation in the future, but we won't touch your fish. Now, if Boris Johnson is gaining this political, you know, it's not an economic benefit. It's not a strategic benefit that he gains. It's a political benefit, because the Brexiteers are obsessed with fish. You know, who's to say that Boris Johnson didn't ask the EU, look, just give us the fish and we'll give you something much bigger as a compromise. Just give me the fish. Like, the Brexiteers are obsessed with fish. I know it means nothing really to you. It means nothing to me, but it means something to them. I'll give you whatever you want in some other area if you give me the fish. And the EU will say, okay, because it doesn't cost us anything. We don't lose anything. We don't benefit really anything from it. So we'll give you that. And then what happens? Boris Johnson returns, yes, I saved the fish. I saved the fishing industry. What's important is to look at what he got and what he gave away. Of course, the Brexiteers will not look at what he gave away, unfortunately.
Especially as they go on to say, greatest mutual benefit will be obtained by protecting shared ecosystems and sustainably managing their exploitation, by upholding existing reciprocal access to waters and fisheries resources with the aim of upholding existing fishing activities, as well as by defining common, coherent, clear and stable principles and rules, enabling mutual open access of fishing and aquaculture products to markets without causing economic or social tensions through unbalanced competition.
But that's basically maintaining the status quo. Now, I don't think that the EU is all that concerned about fish or the fishing industry. So they may be willing to give this to Boris Johnson, to sweeten the deal. Yeah, we'll give you that, but you give us something else. I think it's important to look at every aspect of the free trade agreement, not just one aspect. Because if you look at one aspect, you say, okay, we won on this. Yeah, but where did we lose? In any agreement, you have to look at every aspect of it. Now, the Brexiteers will focus on, we've won the fishing war, but what did you lose? And I'm not saying this from the point of view of a Remainer. I would like the UK to get a good deal with the EU, because I care about the EU and the UK. I have friends and family who live in the UK. I don't want their economy to be destroyed. I don't want them to live under worse conditions. So I would like them to have a good relationship with the EU going forward. But it seems to me that the UK don't want to reach out to the EU. They want the EU to give everything, but they don't want to compromise.
And then to talk about insisting on the need for an overarching governance framework to ensure that any breaches of provisions concerning reciprocal access to waters and resources can be subject to sanctions, including the suspension of preferential tariffs for UK goods in the EU market. So only the UK can be punished. Typical.
Only the UK can be punished, because the UK is the smaller of the two. Do you remember there was a time when Britain was an empire? You had an empire, Jeff, and when smaller countries stepped out of line, they got punished. Why? Because the empire could do it. Now, I'm not comparing the EU to an empire. I know the Brexiteers would love to hear that. But they are the bigger party here. If they feel that rules are not being respected, they will punish. They punish their own members. It's not that they're just out to punish the UK. But also, why is it this idea that it's unacceptable for the EU to make demands, but it's perfectly acceptable for the UK and Boris Johnson to make demands? Do you not understand that there are two sides? Both have demands. I understand that the UK have demands. Maybe I could agree with some of the demands. Maybe I'd disagree with some of the demands. But I'd look at each of the demands separately. I'd rate them. I'd judge them on their merit, on their individual merit. But I don't paint Boris Johnson's government or the UK position as completely wrong and unacceptable. But that's what Brexiteers do with the EU position. They wouldn't treat... Imagine a different scenario where the UK is doing a trade deal with the United States or with Australia or with Japan or any other country. They would be talking about, we need to compromise, we need to reach out to them, we need to create a friendly relationship. That's fine. Yeah, that's perfectly fine if the UK is doing a trade deal with the US or Japan or Australia. But it's not okay if you're doing a trade deal with the European Union. Why? I would like a Brexiteer to explain that to me. Why is it you want to have a good relationship with the United States, but you don't want to have a good relationship with the EU? Do you not understand at the end of the day, the US don't care about the politics, they don't care about the people. they want to get what's best for them. They don't care whether the Brexiteers are happy, or Labour is happy, or Remainers are happy, or Boris Johnson is happy. They are there to do a job, to get the best for their country. The same goes for Australia, the same goes for New Zealand or Japan. There's nothing personal about this. I really don't understand this idea, or this tactic by Brexiteers to inject some sort of personal connection to this. They do it all the time with Michel Barnier. Oh, look, he looks upset, or he looks tired, or what's that got to do with his position? I care more about his position.
Just about seals a no deal for me, that one. There's shed loads more, all in the same vein, all one-way traffic demanding permanent UK vassalage. These talks are going nowhere, and this...
But you wouldn't have a problem if it was the US demanding this. The US can demand whatever they want, and you must bend over and give. But if it's the EU making requests, then it's unacceptable. You know, if you once again, if you said some of these requests are unacceptable, some of them are okay. I would like Jeff to make a video about which parts of the EU he actually considers acceptable, which he actually likes. Are there any parts of the EU that he likes, or is it completely wrong, completely terrible in his eyes? I'm not the biggest fan of the EU. I have my own criticisms of it. I don't think it's a perfect system. It needs reforming in some areas. In some areas it works very well. In other areas it doesn't work very well. But I don't say that in the same sense, I don't say that the UK should be completely destroyed because I disagree with Boris Johnson or I disagree with certain aspects of it. But the Brexiteers seem to think the EU is either good or evil, and you can't be in the middle.
This EU Parliament vote is just more evidence that we did the right thing in voting to leave this overbearing organisation.
This is just ridiculous because you used to be part of it. You used to have all the benefits. Now that the benefits are being taken away, you're angry. It's overpowering. It's overbearing. You used to benefit from this. You could have been part of the trade deal with Japan, with a future trade deal with Australia. You could have been benefiting from that, but you decided not to. You decided we don't want to benefit from that. We want to create our own ones. And once again, as I've said in the past, who is going to get a better trade deal? The EU when it's with Australia? The EU or the UK? Now, the Brexiteers would say the UK can get a better trade deal with Australia because of language or because of the empire or something like this. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't wash anymore. The negotiators from Australia are looking out for Australia. They don't care about the empire. They don't care about the English language. They're there to do a job, to get the best for Australia. The same way the EU negotiators are there to get the best for the EU. What are the British negotiators there for? To create friendships? To talk about the English language? Or are they there to get the best for the UK? So I'm going to end the video here. Jeff more or less finishes here as well. That's all I really have to say about this, but we'll see how things progress. I think Boris Johnson may get a deal, but it's interesting that Jeff and other Brexiteers seem convinced that Boris Johnson is not going to ask for an extension. I'm not completely convinced because Boris Johnson is completely unreliable. I don't think he's going to ask for an extension. I don't think it's really possible that he'll do that. But I wouldn't rule it out because Boris Johnson is unpredictable. Let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun. If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.